yes, higher psychological functions are all different. Thinking is not the same as memory. Memory is not the same as imagination. Imagination is not the same as will. And will is not the same as attention. But my task, Vygotsky said, my task is not to find what separates this from each other. My task is to find what is similar. And what is similar is they all develop according to the same law.
Okay, Nikolai, nice to see you again.
Yeah.
Here we are, huddled up in our homes.
Yeah, and it was a very, very busy day. Just was reading and writing the whole day, good. But it's okay.
Good. Well, good morning. It's 6 a.m. for me.
Yeah.
And it's good to see you. I figured before we started with Principle 4, which is where we left off, can you tell me and us a little bit about your new book? I know it was published by Springer. The title's slipping my mind a little bit, but I know it's you and David Kellogg were translating and commenting on some of Vygotsky's unpublished works. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Okay. This is the book you are speaking about. I don't know. Is it a mirror reflection or somehow? So, but the book is called Vygotsky's Pedagogical Works, Volume 1, Foundations of Pedology. I don't think it's great to make a kind of adverts or promotion of your own book. Some colleagues of mine are doing this quite actively, and this is about market, this is about names, but this is not my book. That's why I wanted to tell about this book. This is Vygotsky's book. So, and nothing bad is in advertising the Vygotsky's book, the book of Vygotsky. So the idea of me and my colleague David Kellogg is to translate 5 volumes of all Vygotsky's articles, books and chapters about pedology, all pedagogical works of Vygotsky. That's why it's only volume 1. But even taking this as a volume 1 is very important, because this volume is a translation of 7 lectures of Vygotsky he did for students, for teachers in Leningrad, just several months before his death. It was one of the last public course of lectures Vygotsky did for students. And that's the first reason. And when David Kellogg invited me to this project to translate this book, I was very happy, because I know this book. It was published in Russian language in 2001, so almost 20 years ago. But I don't know, whatever reasons, it was never translated since. And we decided just to fix this gap and make a translation. And what I'm proud about is that we tried to make the very good translation. That's why we were working about 15 months. 15 months, having only 7 lectures. We were thinking carefully about every single word, how to find it best. And as David Kellogg,
we know that sometimes we know that you have objected over individual words before and have gone on to have like 1 or 2 hour lectures. So
yes, you are right. And the problem of translation is one of the biggest problems with Vygotsky's legacy, because many translations which are the basis for English-speaking researchers are not good. And translation mistakes might generate lots of misunderstandings. And that's why we wanted this book to be a good translation. So this makes me very proud. And plus, we did some commentaries. And why this book is important? Because it opens undiscovered Vygotsky. Why it opens undiscovered Vygotsky? For example, this book gives us an answer to a very simple question. By the way, Anthony, I always ask this question if I want to, not to test, not to check, but if I want to, how to say, to provoke.
Gauge, yes.
To provoke Vygotskians, so-called Vygotskian experts. And the question is very simple. Look, if we think that Vygotsky theory is a theory, if it is a theory, the theory should be based on certain objectively existing laws. Like Newtonian theory is based on the objectively existing physical laws of movements and gravity. The same biology, the same chemistry, you know. So if the theory is not based on the laws, we can hardly call it a theory. And my question is very simple. If we are doing Vygotsky studies, if we are based on Vygotsky theory, if we are following Vygotsky, we should know absolutely clearly Vygotsky's laws Vygotsky discovered, laws which are foundation for the cultural historical theory, right? You cannot do any research in mechanics if you have no idea about 3 laws of Newton, okay? And my question is very simple. How many laws? 6. Wow. You find, you show me 6?
Yes.
Yeah, very good. But you know the literature. If you look at the literature,
I'm just guessing.
The
last time I guessed 5, and you told me I was wrong.
No, yeah, 6 again, not correct.
Okay.
Well, some people know only one law, which is the general genetic law of development, and they are quoting this law. Some people are speaking about 2 laws. 2. Some people gives us lists of 4 laws, but if you compare these lists, they are different. So if you look at the literature of Vygotskians, you see that they have no agreement about how many laws Vygotsky discovered. And can you imagine the same situation in physics, for example? Yeah, can you imagine the same? Can you imagine the same situation in biology? I cannot. So that's why it's my provocation. So this book gives us answer, because 7 lectures, but 3 lectures, 3 out of 7 lectures are completely devoted or dedicated to psychological problems. First is the role of heredity in psychological development, the role of environment in psychological development, and lecture 5, general laws of psychological development of children. So this book brings 4 more laws to cultural historical theory. Okay, we know some, might be 5 or 6 or 4.
The book is upside down.
Oh, sorry, upside down.
Okay.
Okay. So we can debate and argue about how many laws, 3, 2, 4, 5, but never mind. It might be X plus 4.
Can you just very quickly name? You don't even have to describe one of them, or I have to get the book first?
No. It's very easy. Just they are all there. So what I'm saying is that the value of this book, the importance of this book is that in this book, Vygotsky gives and explains very detailed, because of the audience, there were students, very detailed the formulation of these laws, how these laws work, and gives lots of examples from research, from observations of how these laws are manifested themselves. So this is, and unfortunately only one of these 7 lectures were translated. It's 1994, the Vygotsky's Reader, only one. But the most important lecture, which is number 5, is translated for the first time. So that was the reason why I wanted to present this book to the audience, if there is an interest. And the idea is that we will publish 5 volumes. We are now working on the volume 2, which is the complete book called The Problem of Age. Because, as you probably remember, in volume 5 of Vygotsky, there are only several chapters published and translated, but we want the whole book to be translated.
Well, the last time we spoke, you referenced The Problem of Age, and so is that a text that English readers have not encountered yet?
Yep. So in collected works, if you take volume 5 of collected works, there is a part of the volume 5 called The Problem of Age, but only selected chapters were published, because they were published first in Russian edition, not the whole book, but only selected chapters.
I see. Okay.
The whole book, as if the whole book did not exist, but it did. So the next volume will be the complete translation of all chapters of Problem of Age.
And these are the lectures at the end of his young career, after he's gone through the whole pretzel and all the twisted paths that he took.
Just 1 or 2 months before he died. So, okay, so let's finish this story. I think I did enough, and now we come to the point.
Yes. Okay, Nikolai. So in the past, we've discussed 3 of these 5 principles that you have sort of extracted. They're not laid out directly in Vygotsky's work, but you have extracted the presence of each of these. And today, I believe we're going to talk about the principle of developmental tools. And I'm sure you could describe that in a way that I haven't thought of before. And I think the pattern we've been using is pretty much why the tool is important and how it relates to the theory as a whole, how it fits in. And then also a little bit about studies that actually use this particular tool. And then we, as the audience, can think about how we might potentially adapt these principles into classroom settings. So how's that sound to you?
Yeah, sounds
okay.
Sounds okay. Well, as I said previously, and I think I said several times, these principles were not formulated by Vygotsky himself in a form of the list of principles. This list you just demonstrated is what I did on the basis of working with Vygotsky's published and unpublished texts, especially when there are texts describing the concrete experimental settings, experimental design. What was the experimental about? What was so? I just wanted to take, because I wanted to learn myself. What does it mean to make a Vygotsky's experiment? What is the difference? How this type of experimentation is different from the traditional, classical, famous psychological experiments, being in the laboratory or in the classroom, doesn't matter. So for me, it was a kind of task to be able to continue doing experimentation according to general principles or approaches. I was not sure that there are any principles. I was just trying to find, and so I did work hard for several years with Vygotsky's texts, and of course in the dialogue with my colleagues and my teachers. So, and this list is the result of that. But I still don't like when people call it Veresov's principles. I disagree. These are not Veresov's principles; they are Vygotsky's principles. Of course, he did not present this list explicitly, but so-called implicitly, they all are there. So, and we had discussion about 3 of them before, right? So, and today we are coming to the principle number 4, which is the principle of the developmental tools. And as you suggested, the kind of framework for discussion. So I will start from the point why this principle is important. So the answer is quite quite simple on one hand. On the other hand, it's not as simple. So this principle is important because it is related with another principle of the theory. This is the experimental principle. This is the principle how to organize the experiment. But it has a relation with the theoretical principle, which is called the principle of mediation. The principle of mediation, or the concept of mediation, or the idea of mediation, whatever. And of course, you know that for many people, this is the main and the most important contribution of Vygotsky to the psychological studies. There are several books which are trying to convince all of us that the most fundamental, the most important contribution and impact of Vygotsky to the world psychology was that he introduced the principle of mediation. For many people, cultural historical theory and mediation are related, are synonyms even. So, and yes, that's correct. Mediation is very important. And it's one of the key characteristics of Vygotsky theory. But from my point of view, this is only one of key characteristics, and not the only one key characteristic of Vygotsky, and all other ideas are coming from. For me, Vygotsky theory is a kind of map where every point is not less or more important than the others. They all work together, and we cannot understand one aspect without understanding its relation to the other one. So all these ideas are equally important, so to say, and that's why it makes me sometimes not sad but disappointed slightly when I read that the main principle, the most important idea was the mediation. So, and that's why if we read Vygotsky's texts, we can find there lots of ideas about mediation and activity and all these things. But for Vygotsky, mediation was important only in respect to the role of mediation in a process of development. Not mediation as it is. For example, we are now speaking to each other. You are interviewing me, or I prefer this to be a dialogue. So, what mediates our dialogue? Is it mediated? Of course it is. At least it is mediated by the technical tools we use. You are in the United States, I'm in Australia, and we have to use the technical tools which mediates our communication, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes. And a second, I speak English, you speak English. Your English is much better than mine. My English is awful, as I know. But however, if we do not have this mediator, this tool, our communication would be absolutely impossible. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Be very
but
limited.
Yes, but this is not the point Vygotsky was thinking about. Everybody knows that all our activities are mediated. Even when we eat, we are using spoon or chops, depending on our culture, or cups when we drink. What's new here? Mediated activity. All activities are mediated. Why we have to so? But Vygotsky's message was not about that. Vygotsky's message was about, as you know, the subject matter of the theory is the process of development. So Vygotsky's question was, what is the role of human mediators in the process of development.
And as you said, human mediators, right? As opposed to other types.
Human mediators, yeah.
Right.
Or cultural mediators, right?
As opposed to natural mediators?
Oh, well,
yeah,
well,
like the weather or something.
Yeah, these are objective facts, but Vygotsky's focus was on the process of development, yeah, of higher psychological functions. So, and the question was that what is the role of these mediators in development? And he made a very important step. He divided, separated two types of mediators, two types of means, two types of tools people are using which mediate their activities. The first type is just physical tools, for example, tools of labor. When we are building a house, we have to use some instruments, and we mediate. We are using the hammer. We are using all these. So, yeah, and
this would be considered a human mediator.
But it's a kind of physical tool. It's not a sign, right? It's a tool which has its physical properties, and we use this tool to. So, and what this tool mediates? It's a mediator, but what between what and what this mediator exists? It mediates our relations with the objective world, with other physical objects. So, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, and Vygotsky says that this is important, but this is not a psychological. Nothing to do with psychology here. But there is a second type of mediators, a group of mediators, or the class or category of mediators. He called these mediators signs. Okay, so, and for example, language is a system of signs. Actually, every language is a created system of signs. So, what's the difference between signs and physical tools as mediators? First mediates our relationship to other objects. We are changing the objects around us. We are building something new around us using these mediators. It is directed to other objects. The signs are not directed to objects. Signs are directed to other people. They are mediators of our interactions, communications, relationship with other people. So, and therefore, using signs is a very important characteristic from the point of view of psychology. He called the sign a special type of tools called psychological tools. Psychological tools. These are physical tools and they are psychological. So, and that's why.
And like any tool that could be used for good or bad, etc.
So
we could also say maybe tools mediate between people and objects. Signs mediate between people and people.
Yes, absolutely.
Sometimes people treat people as objects, but still it would be considered a sign.
So and system of signs are culturally created by people. And Vygotsky, I don't want to tell you the whole story. I'm just giving you some snapshots.
Sure.
Because as we agreed, it's not a repetition. I'm just highlighting some points. And he made a very important, very important summary or extract of that. He said, and now I'm literally quoting, the human development is different from the other type of development by the principle of signification. The principle of signification, which means that people, they create the cultural signs or they use the cultural signs in their life. Animals never do this. Even the highest developed animals, they have no as developed speech, for example, as we do. So, and many other aspects of these mediators. And what Vygotsky also said is that even in his time, there were some research introducing the concept of the artifact, mediating artifact. And Vygotsky was very critical. He said that the idea of mediating artifact eliminates the difference between tools and signs. They are different. By combining these two in one idea of artifact makes the whole picture vague, you know, and it's like a smog, you know. So that's important. So
I have a very quick question. Is there are there certain tools that sort of walk the line between tool and psychological tool? Where it's sort of hard to distinguish which role it's playing, or maybe it bounces back and forth?
There is one, well, I know one research done in Russia when the researcher was studying how computers mediate the collective learning. And it was very difficult to separate. Is a computer a physical tool, or the computer is a physical tool which works at the same time as a mediator or between the learners? And in this case, of course, we cannot separate this. So, but a computer is still not a tool of labor. So I think the computer is designed to mediate people, but it doesn't make it a cultural sign. So, okay, it's still a physical object, but so I think that the functional role is important. So, and we are coming back to Vygotsky because likely, fortunately, during his life there were no computers. It was not his problem to give an answer. But the answer he gave was that this is the principle of signification, our ability to use cultural signs or to create cultural signs.
When one gains the ability to use a sign, does that equal development or not necessarily?
Yeah, it is, and I will come to this a little bit later. Sorry, I'm making a long lecture, but I just want to make it clear. So, question number 2. So I finished question number 1. So no, not your questions, but I just introduced the principle of mediation. Okay, so then Vygotsky continues, and I'm coming back to the contemporary literature. And in contemporary literature about Vygotsky and Vygotskians, I find a lot of things like mediating sign, mediating artifact, sign mediates, something like that, as if, and you know, it was repeated so many times. It's a cumulative effect, so to say, that people take it as for granted. Of course, mediating artifact, sign mediates, whatever. But do you know that that's not correct? For Vygotsky, the question was not what mediates. For Vygotsky, the question was who mediates his or her activity and communication using tools of mediation. It's not a sign. It's not the English which mediates our conversation. No, psychologically, you and me are using English as a tool to mediate our communication. Do you see the difference between?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So And ironically, Vygotsky said that to say that the sign mediates is the same to say that in Kepler's experiment, the chimpanzee using stick to take the banana says that sticks takes the banana for for chimpanzee, but it's not stick takes the banana for chimpanzee. It's chimpanzee is using stick to take the banana. That's that's the problem. And unfortunately, this idea of Vygotsky was not accepted. At least I know nothing written about that. What I see in literature is repetition of the sign mediates, mediating artifacts, all these things. So, and Vygotsky said that telling this that sign mediates, you are excluding the human beings. You are forgetting the human beings. It was, by the way, it's a reference to one of the dramatic pieces of Chekhov, saying that human being is forgotten. You see? So, okay.
So this is where I guess the error of attending more to the social situation or more to the environment, or to the tools and the structure. That's human beings can be split that way sometimes.
You got it absolutely correctly. Okay. And Vygotsky was categorically against that. He said that we should not exclude the human being who is using the signs to mediate, especially when there is a situation which requires, for example, if there is a situation which requires us to remember something, we are using notes, right? We don't have the task to remember something if this task did not appear in a certain very concrete situation. Okay, so that's what
I have one more quick question.
Vygotsky's
he's usually good at uniting two different elements together with some sort of third option. For example, like the biological versus the social. He finds like a third path. But if you had, say, human, sign, and maybe context or environment.
Human, sign, another human.
Okay, would he sort of put would he put equal weight?
Yeah, but if Anthony, it's clear if there is a human and a human, two humans at least, and the science which mediates the relationship, it's already a social situation.
Okay.
It's a minimal unit of the social situation when two people are communicating using cultural tools. So you cannot separate. That's why I said that you cannot say that social interaction is the most important. Hey, social interaction is the most important, but it's not possible without mediation. Say, oh, mediation is important. I said, mediation doesn't work if there is no social interaction. So all at least these two concepts are equally important. You cannot explain mediation without referencing to social interaction. You cannot explain social interaction without referencing to mediation. So this is the theory, and every theory should have a links, relations, connections between different concepts. For many people, they are different concepts, just list. But for us, it's not. It's a system of concepts. We cannot explain and understand one concept without referring to another one. And your example is brilliant. So.
And I have another very quick question. Sounds like you were saying the emphasis mistakenly used to be on the sign had a greater weight, so to speak. And then it sounds like you might be suggesting that the human should have. Let me finish once. The human should have a greater weight, or is it that human with sign? I know this is a nitpicky point, but is it human with sign is more accurate, or human using sign? That's more accurate.
The most accurate is, as I said, we have to stop asking question what mediates. We have to ask the question who mediates. Okay. So, and by the way, by introducing this idea, of the sign as a mediator, which we use to mediate our activities, has an important consequence. And this is the point when Vygotsky started to separate himself from Pavlov. Do you remember we had a discussion that at the beginning Vygotsky was very close to physiology of reflexology of Pavlov, and he even used a lot of Pavlov's terminology like signalization, signal, reflex. So, and I know one article of Vygotsky when he said that sign is artificial signal. What does it mean? It means that he was trying to introduce a new idea, but he was still trying to keep the old terminology, like artificially created signal. But then he rejected the idea of signaling as explanation of the higher psychological functions. He said that human beings are different because their activities, their communication, interaction is based on the principle of signification, in contrast to the Pavlov principle of signalization. So, not signalization anymore, just signification. And from that time, any ideas of signaling disappeared from Vygotsky's writing. He had created a new concept, a concept of sign, which is related to the principle of mediation, which is that the human beings are using cultural mediators, cultural tools to mediate their activities. So you see the new program started to appear in Vygotsky. That's why he said that. And look, for Pavlov, what was human speech? Do you know how Pavlov defined it? It's very, very famous. He said that we have two signal systems. The first signal system is a system equal to us and animals. Signals from outside, like a stimuli from outside world. Signals. For example, if the dog feels danger, the dog reacts, okay, or trying to hide away or whatever. And he said that human beings have two signal systems. The first signal system as in animals, and the second signal system, which is speech. Speech is a second signal system. Okay, and for Vygotsky it was not. Vygotsky said no. Speech is not just a signal. Speech is something which is much more difficult because this is related to mediation and this is related to science, cultural science, rather than signal. And the role is not to irritate our brain, our hemispheres. The role is that using science, people are creating their high psychological functions. This is why this principle, I'm coming back to my principle of cultural tools, okay, or developmental tools, is so important, because science are developmental tools, or the tools of mind, as Badrova says. And mediation is the process of developing, and this is why the principle of the concept of sign and the principle of mediation and the principle of signification are the most important things. Three things makes this principle very, very, very important. Okay, that was the answer on the first question, why it's important, and what is common, unfortunately widespread misinterpretation of that. So, and we as researchers and you as teachers should not forget that everything we do for children. We should not forget a human being. Because science are not science if nobody uses them. Science cannot mediate, science themselves cannot mediate anything. And until somebody takes and uses this as a mediator, right? So we are not people who are ascribing to the sign a magic force to be able to mediate something by itself. It's not correct. It may be correct, but it's not correct from the point of view of Vygotsky. I might discuss this, I might disagree with that, but my point is to understand first, okay, before I say I agree or disagree. This is another story about that people are disagreeing or agreeing without understanding. It's not the task. My task is to try to understand. Okay. So
before you explain more about how this particular principle fits into the larger theory, I have a quick question. Is a genre, for example, a presidential speech or a press conference or a press briefing or an inaugural speech or a sonnet poem, is a genre synonymous with the sign, or is it sort of like a family of signs working together?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Sure, depends on that. But I'm coming back to the point. Do you remember? The point is that Vygotsky tried to understand the role of the sign, cultural signs, in the process of development.
Okay.
When we are speaking about the genres, so the presidential speech, for example, it's already mediated. We are already developed people. We can understand speech. So you are speaking about the fruits, about the results.
Okay.
But Vygotsky was focused on about what is the whole process which brings to these results, which brings that we are able to use signs, written speech, language, any kind of genres. So for him, it was important to understand why it's so important for higher psychological functions. And I will come to this when I will answer your second question. And if I remember correctly.
So if somebody learned to work in a new genre, say like as a teenager, for example, or even as a young adult, and they learned how to acquire all the habits and awareness that goes with successfully operating within that genre, is that described as development? Like, to what extent is that described? I don't mean to be nitpicky, but I'm very curious. Like, are functions developing there?
Yes, if they are trying to use a new signs they didn't use before, it's a very good chance. You know, there are no automatic outcomes, so it might happen or might not. It might happen that they have a new course of development. They can develop themselves, their higher psychological functions, which did not exist at all for them. So dealing with cultural tools is important, and I can make a reference to the research of my colleague Veronika Nourkova, who is doing a fantastic work about the development of memory. Just memory, how contemporary people, especially students, are now using their memory. And what she discovered is that because of new tools, because of new science, because of new system of science and tools, there is a tendency that people do not memorize the information. They only memorize the place where this information is located, where to find. Okay? You see, the content of memory as a higher psychological function is moved from remembering the information to remembering just the place where to go to find this.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so that's interesting. But what is the most interesting is that the principle of mediation, the principle of signification, and the idea that not the sign mediates, but the human being mediates his or her activity and interaction using signs, old signs or new signs. Because do remember, signification is the use of signs and a creation of signs. So this is a universal principle which works because this is about the human development. This is a universal principle. Without using signs as mediators, there is no development. And I'm now gradually coming to the second question in your list, how this principle is related to the theory. And I partly answered to the question. So it is related to the theory because it is related to several other important concepts of the theory. So it is related with the concept of the sign, right? So it is related to the concept of mediation. It is related to the concept of and the principle of signification in contrast to signalization, and is related to the ideas of cultural development. So this is, I already mentioned, I just want to summarize. And through this, it is related to the idea of the social interaction as a source of development. You see every concept is located in the system of other concepts. And this is the only way to understand particular concept is to describe the relationship with other concepts. As Vygotsky said, in Thinking and Speech, he said that when we are working with children, scientific concepts, when we are developing concept development, we have to have in mind the idea that we cannot introduce the concept itself. What we are introducing is a concept in the system of the concepts. So that's why scientific concepts are not okay to be developed in early childhood, because in early childhood, children cannot understand the system of concepts. So their level of development does not allow them to understand. They might understand on their level something about some specific concepts, but it will be not in their mind. They will rather remember what is this about rather than understand, because the early childhood is the period of life, is a psychological age when the leading higher psychological function is memory. For children at this age, to think means to take something from the memory. Okay, so, and only in later stages thinking becomes the leading function, and then memory subordinates to thinking. But at early childhood, thinking subordinates to memory. Memory guides the thinking. So this is, but we can discuss this later. And I'm just reminding you about our second volume we are translating, The Problem of Age. This is the volume where Vygotsky explains this. And also the laws of subordination are presented in this book, Lecture 5. One of the laws is the law of subordination of hierarchy of higher psychological function. Okay, so I'm using this as a kind of propaganda of Vygotsky, sorry.
Well, and the book, I'm going to be honest, the book becomes more appealing when the book is an answer to a question that just arose organically, because I had 3 questions in my head.
Yeah, okay.
And you're like, okay.
Okay, this is the
Here's where to find the answer.
This is a, yeah, he formulates the law of subordination, saying that at every age, psychological age, there is one leading function, and all others are subordinated, and then they change the places. So, and therefore the development goes from one stage to another through the critical periods when there is a kind of reorganization of the whole system of functions, and it goes on. But it's a different question to discuss. But I think as you ask the question, I'm trying to give you the answers according to my understanding. Maybe not correct answers, but this is how I understand.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing.
Okay.
Quickly.
Yeah.
So if a child is basically too young to understand a scientific concept because that concept is sort of nested or related to a constellation of concepts, and the child is more sort of memory oriented, right? Does the child, as the child learns the relation of concepts in the scientific concept, hold on, is memory the main force there, because you're remembering how this relates to this and this relates to this?
Yeah. They can only remember their relations, but they cannot understand the deepness of the concept, because their level of development of their thinking is not good enough to understand the deep relations between the concepts.
Okay, so understanding
every age has limits. Right. Yeah, because look,
is there a sharp line between understanding and memory?
Yes. Yeah, because there are lots of things in your memory. In my memory, we remember many things we do not understand. We even know some things we do not understand. right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite obvious that people know things, but they have no idea about this.
Right. Okay.
Huh? Yeah, even adults. Okay. So is it recorded as well?
Yes.
Good. You can then make a edit.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
it was a very nice discussion. I like the discussions rather than just my lectures. Okay. Okay, so we are continuing to answer your next question, how it is related to the theory. So
Yes.
I mentioned that this is related to series of concepts, okay? And even more, this principle, I'm now speaking about experimental principle, is related to one of the laws of development. This is very interesting because Vygotsky formulated this law and he presented this law in his books. He even said that this is the most important law of cultural development. But believe me or not, if you look on the literature about Vygotsky, do you remember I mentioned the lists of 4 laws, 2 laws, 1? In none of these lists, this law is even mentioned. And I was surprised. It's in Vygotsky's collected works. The only thing is just to open volume 5 and read. You might disagree, you might say, no, it's not a law of development. But at least you understand that it was law Vygotsky himself defined as the law of development. And he said it is the most important law of development. So, and that's why I want to tell you a little bit about this law, very shortly. So this is the law which says that there are 4 stages of development of every higher psychological function. 4 stages of development of very high functions. So this is the law, which means that every high psychological function in child development goes through these 4 stages. They are genetically related stages of development. And it gives us a key to understanding. If something goes wrong with the child, if the child has a problem, difficulties, maybe one of these stages was didn't went correctly. Maybe one of the stages was not, how to say, well, you understand what I mean.
Sure.
Might be the problem in one of these stages, and this gives us a better understanding if we want to think how we can help this child. Okay, so, and these 4 stages are very simple. The first stage Vygotsky called sometimes he called it the stage of primitive psychology, but nowadays the word primitive is not politically correct, and therefore I prefer to use the word the stage of natural behavior. Natural behavior is when the small children are not using any signs. Their behavior is natural. So it's like the child needs to remember a number of objects in front of him. And the child is not using even finger to count this. He tries to remember. And some children, small children, can remember the amount of things. For example, if there are 2 or 3 things, like 2 or 3 balls, but if there are 10, 12, 20, so the children cannot. So they cannot. So this is about lower psychological functions. They are using their natural memory, they are using their natural attention, and of course, if they are motivated and interested. So this is what Vygotsky called is kind of natural. So, and it's a kind of operating of things without using tools and science to organize the process of memorizing. I'm introducing the words, which is important because for English people, to memorize and to remember is the same. They say, remember this, or memorize this. It's the same. It's a colloquial language. It's an everyday language. But for Vygotsky, it was not the same. To remember, I have to memorize first. Right? I cannot remember things which I did not memorize. So memorizing is one aspect, and remembering is another one.
Okay.
But unfortunately, in all texts, when Vygotsky describes memorization and memory, separates, saying that memorization is that natural or primitive psychology, when the child tries to memorize without using some external tools. So, not a memory, not a remembering, but memorizing. In Russian, it's word zapominanie. Okay, but unfortunately, it was all translated as remembering. Zapominanie, memorizing, is not a remembering. Okay, it's just a passing by comment. So, and then as the child grows, the child comes to the second stage. The second stage is the stage of naive psychology. What does it mean, naive psychology? It's the second stage when the child is copying, imitating the ways of using some tools to organize the memorization we adults use. But the child is using these tools just to imitate. For example, we are saying that we are using these fingers like 1, 2, 3, and the child also can repeat 1, 2, 3, but he doesn't understand that the fingers are related to the number of objects. For him, it's still 3 different things.
Okay.
And this second stage, the child moves through this stage very quickly, very quickly. It's a kind of intermediate stage, because the most important stage is this stage number 3. Vygotsky said, call it the stage of external signs and stage of external operations. So, and Vygotsky in volume 6 and in some of his publications, he gives examples of series of experiments he did to show how the children are quickly coming to the stage of external operations and external signs. They understand quickly the idea how to use something which helps them to remember the numbers, like in mathematics, or was an example with the pictures and words and so on. And you will find it in his writings. So the idea is that this is a kind of external operations with external signs. And what is important, these operations with external signs are different than operations without signs. Operations without signs is the child has to look at the objects and say to himself, remember 3, something like that. But when there is a sign like fingers, or 1, 2, 3, so you see the operations are different. There are operations of pointing, there are operations of relating the signs to the objects. So it's a different psychological structure of operations, but they are external operations and the signs are external signs. So.
And external to the child.
Tools and external, it's a stage
right,
of external.
But external from the mind, or external,
Yeah, external,
meaning it. I just mean
no,
outside of the head, or outside of the person, meaning like
outside of the head, outside, which external,
outside
which
of the
is
person as well.
So they are looking on the object, they are giving tasks, they are counting, calculating, they're trying to remember this. They're using external tools, and this is the stage 3. And then the next stage is stage 4, which is the stage of internal operations and internal signs. When the child begins to use not just real fingers to count, when the child can count without using fingers, as if the fingers are now in his mind. Okay. He's doing the same operations, but these operations are completely internal.
Is this something we could call like the complete decontextualization of mediational means? Is that would that be synonymous with number 4?
Yeah, okay. You can call it like this. So I'm not speaking about the titles, about the names and labels. I'm speaking about the idea. So, and as Vygotsky said, this is the general law, which means that every high psychological function goes through these 4 stages. It is equal to development of memory, development of thinking, development of will, development of imagination. So,
and then, so it's possible memory might be on stage 4, where volition might be on stage 2.
Yes,
like that, right?
yes. This is another law of de-synchronicity. And it never happens that they all are equally developed. Do you remember? At every stage there is one function which is more developed and others are less developed. We never have in the child, or even in adults, all high psychological functions developed equally. It never happens. It never happens. Some functions are developed more, sometimes some functions are developed less. That's what makes all of us unique. Some people are saying, oh, I have bad memory. Yeah. Some people say, oh, Nikolai, you are thinking days and nights, impossible, I cannot do this. Something like that, you know. So that's what I call the architecture of high psychological functions. And everybody, you and me and everybody, has its own, his or her own architecture of the functions, which is the result of our individual development in different cultures, different conditions, and so on and so on and so on. Okay, but again, we are not speaking about the results. We are not speaking about the fruits. We are speaking about the whole process, how these fruits are coming. So first, no signs, then imitation of using signs, then conscious using sign as external tool mediators, and then internal signs and internal operations. These are stages, and this is the very important law. I think it's very important and very helpful for researchers and teachers to understand if the child has a problem with the memory. It's not because the child has a bad memory. It might be because the child had a problem and his cultural memory was not developed, and he has to use his physiological memory to solve the tasks which require a cultural memory. So the way to support this child is to help this child, to introduce to this child these tools which he can use to remember something, and then to improve his memory to the higher level. So not to train his natural memory, but to give him tools to transform his natural memory into the cultural memory.
Say that last sentence again, please, in a different way. I'd like it. I just like to hear you say it in a different way. It was basically not to train the natural memory, but
not to train his natural memory, thinking that the child has a bad memory because no, the child cannot remember things and cannot remember things because of his memory is bad, and not to train his natural memory, but to think about how to develop his cultural memory by introducing him the tools, the signs he can use to organize his process of memorizing differently. We are not working with the memory, we are working with the memorizing, because memorizing is external operations. Do you remember memorizing and memory? Okay? So we are not teaching the child how to remember. We are teaching the child how to organize memorizing. And if the memorizing is based on the cultural tools, it will affect his memory. He will remember more and longer. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
And it was in my book, which you know. There were examples about that. So I'm just repeating things you know, but I think it's very important. So this is a, from my point of view, this law is very, very important, very interesting, and very helpful. But again, unfortunately, in the contemporary literature, I cannot find any explicit explanation of this law. Even the books like A Companion to Vygotsky, Introducing Vygotsky, Essential Vygotsky. Can you imagine the book Essential Newton without mentioning Newtonian laws of mechanics? I cannot. But there is a book, Essential Vygotsky, which says nothing about this law of 4 stages of development. And my question is, why? I don't know. Okay, so, and you see, if we are, me as an experimenter, if I want to study the process of development, this principle of developmental tools is very important for me, because my task is to bring to the laboratory certain number of different tools and introduce these tools for the child, and then I can organize the special situation of the problem solving or play situation or storytelling or plot when the child will be indirectly conditioned to start using these tools. And for me as a researcher, it might be very interesting to make a kind of observation of how the child is using this tool. Is it on the stage of naive psychology, or he's just imitating, or he's using this as an external tool with external operation, or he's already do it very quickly and then very quickly comes to the final stage. Might be a very interesting research project. For example, if we take the children with special needs, we can make a research about what are the most appropriate tools we can provide to these children to support their development because of their disability or something, right? Or we can make a study about children at different ages. What are the most efficient tools to support their development according to their age, their gender, their social conditions, their level of development? There is a huge amount of possible research, but for me this is one of the most important principles, because first it is related to the process of development, and as a result we know that Vygotsky's definition that every higher mental function is mediated by its construction. This is a characteristic of every higher mental function. Every higher mental function is not direct function, it's mediated by its construction. And the process of mediation goes through 4 stages as a transition from non-mediated forms of behavior to mediated forms of behavior, which are now becoming the internal stage of internal tools, internal signs, and internal actions or operations. So this is a kind of the paradigm. This is a kind of the line, and you see the genetic line here, from natural forms of behavior to cultural forms of behavior, and then to high psychological functions. The whole process of how high psychological functions are becoming high psychological functions, which we now can use freely communicating. So they had the same story. And it doesn't matter when. It happened in 18th century, 20th century, 20th century. It will happen in 21st. Never mind in which country. Australia, US, Finland, doesn't matter. Of course, the tools are different, because tools are different depending on their culture. So we are eating with the spoons, somebody is eating with the chalks. So we are using English, somebody is using Chinese, doesn't matter. So these are only conditions, these are only diversity. But through this diversity, Vygotsky introduced the general law which works. And my example is like, you know, you know, well, when the rock falls from the cliff, and when I shoot with the gun, it might look very differently, but the trajectory of the bullet and the trajectory of the stone are can be calculated according to the same law of gravity. So they look different, but in fact, the law, and as Vygotsky says that yes, higher psychological functions are all different. Thinking is not the same as memory. Memory is not the same as imagination. Imagination is not the same as will, and will is not the same as attention. But my task, Vygotsky said, my task is not to find what separates this from each other. My task is to find what is similar. And what is similar is they all develop according to the same law. And one of these laws is the law of 4 stages of development of every high psychological function. And now you can see why Vygotsky said that this is very important law. Okay, so that was the answer to your second question. And what is the third one?
And you could see how this could lead to research. This law.
Well, yeah.
How it could support research.
Yeah, one of my colleagues. She was my PhD student, Victoria Minson. She did a very interesting study about how teachers in early years. No, I don't mean early years. I mean early childhood. So actually, I mean kinder. So age 4, 5. How teachers, practical teachers, might help children to develop their higher psychological functions on their level, of course. Mostly memory, because memory is the leading, as you know. So to help them to overcome the problems. And one of the cases was a case I presented in Moscow last year. It was a case of one girl who had a problem with storytelling. You know, I don't know in America, but in Australia, it's very popular practice in kindergartens, storytelling, which means, oh, no, not storytelling, but show and tell. Yeah, show and tell. Just children bring some toys from home and they are asked to tell a short story about it. And this girl had a problem. She could not. She did bring the monkey from home, but she couldn't tell any story about monkey. And there might be lots of reasons for that, yeah. But we discovered that the reason for that was that she didn't have developed internal tools to be able to tell the story according to the scenario she can keep in the memory and tell the story according to this. So the sequence of actions. So, and we developed a special program for this girl by introducing first external. So we just reproduced the 4 stages of development. So we took her and moved her through the 4 stages. And as a result, he was able to tell the story about 3 little pigs, for example. And from the very beginning to the very end, which is much longer story. It's much more difficult story than the story about the monkey. So because she had to remember all the plot, all the scenario, what every character says and when and how. And we even did the provocation. We invited the teacher who tried to change the story and saying that so changing the story, but the girl was saying, no, it was not like that. It was like that. So this is one of the examples. And what is interesting in that research was that on that basis, my younger colleague, she's now had a job in Melbourne University in I think it's a Deakin University. Yeah. So she's now a young early career researcher. And one of the outcomes is that on the basis of this research, my young colleague, Victoria Minson, she has developed a matrix for teachers. The teachers can use to be able to notice the moments when the child has difficulties, and to
Mm.
immediately create a small program of how to support the child to overcome these difficulties based on the principle of Vygotsky.
Mm.
And she introduced that matrix to teachers, and I hope that the matrix will be widely used in Australia. At least there is an interest to this matrix in Russia and in Sweden.
Mm.
And she was invited to come to Sweden to introduce this matrix to Swedish teachers, early kinder teachers. But because of the situation with the coronavirus, so it was all changed. But I think this is a kind of example of how we can help children, but not using our, our speculations, but on the basis of the objectively existing laws. So,
got it.
Yeah, okay. So this is the principle of cultural tools or developmental tools, and now you can see it's the same. Cultural tools are becoming developmental tools only when people, children or adults, are using these tools to mediate their relationship or interactions or collaboration, whatever, with others. You cannot use science to mediate your relationship with nature. But you can use science to mediate your relationship with other people, with cultural realities. And by doing this, you are creating a new type of memory. You're building your cultural memory. For example, and I love this example, I give it to students. If you know Russian language, which is in your head, okay? Yeah? Your memory is not limited by your head, because potentially every book written in Russian language is in your memory. You go to the library and take the book. So language, Russian language, as a system of cultural science extends my memory, which now potentially includes every book which is written in Russian. But of course, it's not in my head. It's in the library. It's like I'm using my natural memory when I have a task to recall something. I'm just internally coming to the storage of my memory and trying to take from that storage information I need. But cultural memory doesn't work like that. Cultural memory works another one. I go to the library as a storage of my cultural memory. And that storage, comparing to my natural memory, is million times more bigger.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So my second example is how cultural memory works. So in Melbourne, in the city center, in the city of Melbourne, we have a very how to say, very impressive memorial for Australians who died during the war, or all the wars. So why people are building these things, memorials? Take the word memorial. Okay, memorial, memory. To keep this in our collective memory, not to forget those heroes who gave their lives to liberate the world from fascism. So natural memory is very short. Naturally, it's not natural to remember. What is natural is to forget. As you know, our working memory is very short, and but cultural memory is different. What is natural for cultural memory is to remember, but not to forget. And therefore, generation from generation, we keep the memory of important events in a history because of these memorials. They are physical, they are objective, but they are elements of our cultural memory. It's a symbol, it's a sign, not to forget what happened and how people have, and so these all things, and this is about humans. Animals never create the memorials. They don't need. Say that what is the difference between high animals and human beings? Vygotsky did the answer. Said that the difference is the principle of signification, the ability to use signs and create signs like in memorials, for example, which animals never do. Even the high developed animals like apes, dolphins, whatever. Even the socially organized animals like honeybees or whatever. So this because this is the cultural memory. So that's why as a psychologist, when I'm doing my research about to support children to develop their cultural memory, I cannot do this without bringing to the children some cultural tools, which then maybe they will use as their developmental tools, depending on the situation. So, okay. And you see how important this is for teachers. The general advice is when the child has a problem, don't think it's because of genetics. Don't think it's because of brain disorder. Think about maybe the child was not supported when he was at the second stage. Maybe the child was not good in moving through this third stage. And what we have to do is just to take the child, put the child into specially created situation, might be play, game, competition, whatever, and to introduce these tools he probably or she probably doesn't have. And then having these internal tools, the child will come back to the class being equipped with the tools, and a new task will be much easier for the child to understand or to remember, because if there are tools, the child can use tools with different tasks. They are not related to the certain task. Okay?
So it's helpful to assist the child in acquiring the tools in perhaps a more playful setting.
Yeah,
and then transport those tools to an academic setting, I guess.
Yeah. When the child has tools here, so that the child much better understands the new information, because the tools work. They are not related anymore to the concrete task. They are universal. The child can apply these tools for different, and even without even understanding how it happens that he can remember more, because it goes in a way that the child might not even understand.
Is there a certain way to isolate or identify which higher mental function is underdeveloped when you see a student struggling with a particular task?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay.
You can use the standard tests. There are, in classical traditional psychology, there are standardized tests of checking the development. So,
okay.
But for us, for Vygotsky, it's only a first step. First, to identify which functions are underdeveloped, and then to build a strategy how to develop.
Yeah, but having that first step is helpful, I believe.
Yeah.
Because teachers are often focused on the task itself.
Yes,
here's the student is unable to complete this task,
but
as opposed to the student is underdeveloped in this particular function.
Yeah, but it's very important to identify which function exactly needs attention. So
a child who has a hard time organizing for homework, for example.
Yeah, might be.
Is there I know this is a very broad example, but is there any particular advice you could offer?
You know me, Anthony. I never give advices on the cases, on imaginary cases. So my professional answer is that let me talk to this child. Let me make some procedures with this child, and then I will give you an answer, because it might be several reasons. So there are no universal recipe for that, and it's good. And that's good, because every teacher knows that what works with one child might not work with the other. So this is a kind of every teacher knows this. Yeah.
So, but that even then your answer right there is helpful, because it's not simply get organized or not get organized. It's more like you're a couple different possible paths that could be improved.
And maybe the child was not just didn't learn what are the tools he can use to organize. I can give you an example, by the way. It's about my being adult. It's about me, because I know. So why I'm using me? Because I know this as a patient and as a doctor, as a psychologist. When I was young, a teenager, I was always late. I was late to lessons. I was late to come to school. I was late. So I had no time management. So, and sometimes it was a problem, sometimes it wasn't. It was not a problem, but it became a problem when I was late to my first date with the girl.
Doesn't matter.
And she had to wait, for me for half an hour. And of course, she didn't want to wait for me for half an hour. And therefore, I lost my first chance to make my first date with the girl. And then I suddenly understand that I have a problem. You see, social situation of development, okay, motivation. And I had a conversation with my teacher. I had a teacher in my school, Taisia Mogilyanskaya, fantastic teacher. And she said to me, Nikolai, I know how to solve the problem. Can you put your clock 5 minutes ahead? Every time you watch on the clock, so you see that it's quarter to, but actually it's 22. Okay, and then you have, if you start moving immediately, so you will be in time. And that's I did. And believe me or not, this helped me a lot. And now you can just contact my colleagues in Monash. I can give you emails and say that what is the most important characteristic of Nikolai? The answer will be Nikolai is never late.
Yeah.
Never. You probably noticed our meetings. With just time.
Yes, so we both like to be punctual.
Especially for Australia, people are always late. 10, 15 minutes. That's not a problem. So, but do you know what? I understand now. But still, even now, my clock are 5 minutes ahead. I automatically calculate it back. But if I put 12 as 12, I will then automatically calculate it 5 minutes back, and I will begin being late all the time. So you see. So this is just an external tool to organize my time management. But now is now internal. But external still 5 minutes ahead, because otherwise my internal tool will be just
it's a simple fix.
Yep. Okay.
I have one last question. And,
yeah.
Can you think of some research questions that can be answered with this particular tool, with this particular principle, or can you think of any other research studies that utilize this principle?
Well, of course, on one hand, we have a lot of research about using different signs and tools, developmental tools, and I can give you an example with the fantastic work of Elena Badrova and Deborah Leong. They published several books, and their book The main book is that The Tools of the Mind. The Tools of the Mind, published 1996. You can find a lot of interesting information there. They are in United States. And many others. And as I said, some of my students are also applying this principle. But this principle might be very helpful if the research question is somehow related to the idea of sign and mediation and the tools. And so, because there are millions of research questions, but if the research question is related to the development, looking on the what kind of signs and how they mediate, and how children are using different signs to mediate. So these heaps of research questions are the questions which will require this principle to be introduced to the research program. But before that, I ask my students to think carefully about, is this principle applicable to their research? Because, as you know, there are 5 principles, and sometimes only one of these principles is applicable to the research, sometimes 2 principles. So I cannot imagine the situation when all 5 principles are applicable, because our research questions are very specific. We cannot ask general questions. This is for philosophy, and we love philosophy, but we are not philosophers.
Okay.
When we do our research. But however, what I think is important is that there are principles, and you can just think about which of these might be better for your research program, and it's a very, very big help for the students. I think they have something to choose from,
right?
Instead of building something which might be good or not. So, and that was the utilitarian or practical or concrete idea I wanted to.
And is there any general approach, maybe not because I said general, but of I'd say you have a class full of 20 students, and you're trying to identify which level each student is on in terms of the 4 levels of higher mental function development. Is there an approach that could be used for that?
Well, look, it depends on the age of your children. If your children are adolescent or teenagers, none of them is definitely on the first stage, only on the second stage, right? So the bigger problems are on the stage 4 and the stage 3 and stage 4, because this is the most important. So, and then you just give them the task and see how they are solving the task. If you see that they have a problem, just talk to them. Why you couldn't? What was the problem? What you didn't understand? And they will tell you a story about what's the problem, and then you can interpret this story in the sense that, aha, okay, that's the point. Do they have the tools or not? And then you create a something special for each of them. Yeah, but look, these are research principles. They are not pedagogical principles. But pedagogically, I think it's very important for teachers to think about what are the cultural tools of development of child thinking we are bringing to them. So what variety of tools we are introducing during the lesson for them to support them to understand something new, not just give them the material. Just you have to remember this and this and this. No. So you have to think about what might be the different cultural tools to support their memory, to support their understanding, thinking, and to support their motivation even. So a kind of instrumentarium, a psychological instrumentarium, because I can explain the new concept to children, or I can show the picture, or I can show the model, or I can give them a metaphor. And sometimes even I'm using anecdotes, jokes, to to support my students to understand psychological concepts. When I'm teaching the students very difficult psychological concepts, sometimes I just tell them, yeah, I need this, the short story, the joke, because they remember the joke, but in the joke, there is a whole idea. And do you know my favorite joke about motivation? You know this? You don't know? So imagine I'm a teacher or the professor at the university. I'm teaching the general psychology course, and I have to make a class about motivation, human motivation, external motivation, internal motivation, stimulation, types of motives, the hierarchy of motives, all these stuff, as we always do, right? The Maslow hierarchy of needs and motivation. So different approaches to motivation, Heckhausen idea of motivation, that the Vygotsky's ideas of motivation, Leontief's ideas of motivation, and the children are students are getting crazy about that, because so I said, okay, the only thing you have to remember is a very short joke. The joke is, I'm not good in terminology in English, but okay, I hope you understand. So the joke is that it was a court in America. It was a guy who killed people, and the verdict was death. Death, okay, because of he killed people, okay, terrorist or something. And the death is on an electric chair. Is it electric chair the correct word? Yeah? So, and he was in a prison, in a jail, and once in the morning, so the special people came to his place and took him to the corridor, to the room where there is electric chair. So, and when they wanted him to sit in the chair, he was so fat that he couldn't fit himself to the chair. And they decided, okay, how can we, okay, we postponed the execution, and we put him to the very strong diet, like only vegetables or something, just for him to lose the weight. And in 2 weeks, they came again, and they bring him again, and he was even fatter. It was okay. Wow, what was his diet? Just vegetables and fruits and okay. We have what we have to do. Just bread and water. That's it. Small piece of bread, small amount of water for 2 weeks, and they did. In 2 weeks they came back. He took him, bring him to the chair, and he was even fatter. They were saying, "Hey guys, hey guy, what is going on?" Do you know what his answer was? He said, "Hey guys, I simply don't have a motivation."
Perfect.
You see, this is another cultural tool to help students to understand and to remember what motivation is. So for some students, the picture is good. For some students, the metaphor is good. For some students, the explanation is good. For some students, a short video is good. But I, as a teacher, I can use all the variety of the tools for my students. And then as a kind of the result, everybody will understand what real motivation is. Motivation is this. When there is no motivation, nothing happens. Everything we do is because of motivation. Everything we don't do is also because of motivation. Motivation is not only what motivates our activity. Motivation might motivate our passivity as well.
How does the punchline? How does the punchline sound in Russian?
Huh?
How does the punchline sound in Russian for the same joke? Punchline is like the last line of the joke.
In Russian,
ребята,
у меня просто нет мотивации. Мотивация, it's very soft. Okay.
I'm motivated to ask one last question.
Okay.
Because I think I'm probably in the average as a teacher that we think more about tasks than about higher psychological functions. Like that's not the vocabulary that we tend to have in our head. So,
oh yeah, but it's not pedagogical, it's a psychological, like, of course.
So let's say a student has to write let's say an editorial article, like a 400-word opinion article for a newspaper. Which psychological functions can you name that are probably at play during that task?
All of them.
Can you name, just list some for me.
All of them. Memory, yes. Yes. Thinking, yes. Yes. Imagination, yes. Attention, volition. All 5 high psychological functions are in action.
So potentially a student could have a deficit in one or more of those.
Yeah.
And that's where the block is, I guess. Like, you know, somebody who's unable to perform the task.
This might be this, or might be motivation, which is not included.
Okay.
Maybe he's just not interested, or maybe he doesn't understand why this task should be completed.
Sure. Yeah.
Or maybe he understands why the task should be completed, but he doesn't understand why this is important. So there might be a million of reasons, not only in relation to his higher psychological functions, but in relation to his personality, personal circumstances, something like that. So, and every teacher knows that when the child is acting this way or that way, it might be a million reasons behind that.
Sure.
And this is what makes our job a piece of art. We are artists. So my message is that pedagogy is arts rather than the industry or something like that.
But this to me is really interesting, that, you know, there's these different like mental functions plus motivation over here, and any number of these factors can be at play.
And you know, they don't want separately. Do you remember hierarchy, architecture?
Sure.
So they support each other. For example, if there is a deficit of imagination, it might be compensated with the better memory. Or if there is a deficit of thinking, it might be compensated by the development of imagination. So all this, so we have to, so, and the best way is that the student, if the student needs to write an essay, give a structure, give them a structure. So, and this helps, the structural, what is the point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 1, point 2, point 3, then point 4, agreements, disagreements, and then conclusion, something like that. If you give a matrix as an external tool, they will use this to organize their external activity, and then it will help them to change their thinking. If they use several times this structure, then in the future they take the new newspaper and they will read newspaper having this structure already, and then they will be able to see the structure of the newspaper instead of the content.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So. Okay.
Is there any final thoughts that you'd like to share on Principle 4? Or
no. So we spent 2 hours. Sorry, Anthony. 2 hours is, I think. So thank you for your patience.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you.
Always good to see you.